My name's Josh Jones, and I'm the lead product engineer at Esri for our Microsoft integration efforts. I wanted to start just by sharing a little bit about who we are and why it's worth being interested in what we're doing. Esri is the global market leader in geographic information systems, allowing companies throughout the world to extend their analysis toolsets with spatial intelligence. Today I'm going to focus in on the integration pieces that we're building, which live inside Microsoft products. But before any of that, let's talk about coffee. Specifically, let's talk about a use case where you might want to figure out more about your data and learn what's going on. So let's say you work at some large, unnamed coffee chain and you need to figure out what's going on with your supplies. You've noticed that there's a problem, but you aren't quite sure what's going on. So it's time to apply a little bit of analysis. This is where we can step in to help. Not only are you going to be able to analyze your data, but you're going to be able to think about that analysis in its spatial context, and that's going to allow you to derive more meaning and thus more value. So let's start looking at how this works by talking about ArcGIS Maps for Office. Now, ArcGIS Maps for Office gives you access to a fantastic set of tools which open the door to full-fledged enterprise-level GIS analysis across your organization. For now, let's look at a demo which addresses that coffee shop problem I mentioned. So here we have an Excel sheet that contains data about our coffee shops, their locations, inventory and coffee cups at each location, cost of supplying each item, the associated cost center, revenue from sales, and so on, and their last order date. Now, this gives us some idea of what we're looking at just in terms of numbers, but it doesn't give us much context of where there might be some problems. So let's add a map to the spreadsheet using ArcGIS Maps for Office. And here it comes. So as you'll see, right off the bat, when we add a map to the spreadsheet, the first thing it's going to ask for us to do is add some data. Now, the software makes the assumption that you're going to want to work with data that's coming from your Excel sheet, so it prompts you to automatically add Excel data. By default, it's going to try to be smart and pick out a table if you already have one defined. In this case, it's right, but I could change that to a range or a named range if I wanted to. Now, since we agree that we're going to be adding data which lives inside our Excel sheet, we need to tell the software where that data is and how it's formatted, so let's do that. The software tries to make some smart decisions for us about where the data is and the type of data that's available. And it's chosen our table for us and automatically picked out the address column as our location type. And in this case, it's right. We can adjust that if we need to by hitting the drop-down arrow here and change it to matching to cities, countries, or even our own custom location type if we have one. But we do want addresses this time, so we'll leave it as is. Next, we'll tell the map how we want it to style itself. It'll give us options for each of the columns in our data set so that we can pick the one which best represents the data we want to display. And since we're dealing with an inventory problem, we'll use cup count. Finally, we can adjust our map theme and style things differently depending on how we want to represent our data, just as individual points and locations, as a heat map, showing both counts and amounts by size or color, or using different symbols for each class. For our purposes, we want to show the counts and amounts styled by color to make the locations where there are problems visually pop out. So let's go ahead and get this data added to the map. And there it is. Okay, so this is helpful in that it quickly spatially contextualizes our data, but it doesn't really give a clear depiction of what's going on with inventory at each store, and what external factors might be impacting those inventory levels. So what if we want to explore how local demographic trends might be impacting our store's success? We've got a tool for that, and it's called demographics. So in our use case, we think we've got a competition problem, so we want to identify what purchasing trends look like for coffee in our target locations. We're going to browse through the available demographic variables and see if we can find something that relates to coffee purchasing behaviors in our target markets. So here we're going to check out what buying habits look like for coffee bought from convenience stores. And as you can see, it added a card to the map which reflects buying habits around the current map view. Now as we zoom around and adjust that view, the card's going to update with the latest data for our new view. We're particularly interested in one small area, though, where we already know there's a problem. And here we go. Now we know that we want to look at this area, but we also need to understand the styling a little to make things a bit clearer to understand. Because after all, how can we analyze this data clearly if we can't see what we're doing? So we're going to adjust the overall appearance of the map itself. Let's start with the base map. The software gives you a gallery view of any base maps that your organization has set up. For our use case, we want to keep it nice and clean and go with a dark grey canvas, and that'll allow our points to really pop out against the background. We're going to further stylize our map here so that we can get a better understanding of our inventory problem. Yes, the blue points here sort of tell us what's going on, but we can do better than that. There's a wide variety of styling options that you can use here, but what we're really interested in for our purposes is classification, so that we can conduct some very quick visual analysis. So as it stands, we're using quantile breaks, which distribute our values into groups that contain equal numbers, then applies different colors to each group. Because we have specific ideas about what low inventory actually means, we're going to want to establish our own manual breaks here so that those problems really stick out. We're going to break our values into 3 groups, and those 3 groups will show us which stores have high, low, and medium inventory. In other words, which are undersupplied, oversupplied, and just right. Next, we're going to establish what we want the style of these groups to be. Now, the fill color is what's going to vary here. So right now it's just blue, but we need something that really represents where things need to be examined. That's much better. Okay, so now we can see that those stores in bright red are definitely problems, and as we expand our table of contents, we can see the groupings that we defined. Now, if we click through to one of the stores here, we'll get specific data that made up that point on the map. We can see here that the cup count is reflected on each of these points. So this looks good, but it's not super actionable. You know, I'd like to be able to tell the exact address of the stores that have problems. So the next thing we're going to do, let's go ahead and add some labels. We're going to turn the labels on, then adjust the formatting for them so that they stand out more clearly against that dark background, and make them white text with a black outline. Now at this point, the work has made it abundantly clear that our store at 340 Mission Street, which is deep red, is having a very obvious problem. They only have 1,200 cups left, even though they're a relatively cheap store to supply at 11 cents per unit. So let's check what else is in close proximity to this store. Maybe the fact that other stores are too close is the problem. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to generate a drive time polygon to check which stores are up to a 2-minute drive away from this one. Here it comes. And it looks like we do have a number of stores that are pretty close to our problem store, so maybe that's part of the issue. Some of them, like the one over at 27 Drum Street, have actually a really high inventory count, and this one's more expensive to supply, so it might make sense to transfer some inventory across. Now at this point, I'm pretty confident we've found part of the problem. Definitely enough to demo it for the public. So I'd like to share my map out with ArcGIS, and I want to publish it so that other people in my organization can get a look at my inventory analysis. So what we're going to do is we're going to apply an appropriate title, then summary, and we're going to share this map out. So here we go. Alright, and once it's shared, all done. I can see the shared item here in my ArcGIS Online organization, and then use it for later analysis in other ArcGIS applications too. And here's what it looks like in the web viewer. Now there's one last hurdle to cross here. My manager doesn't have time to do any analysis or even open Excel. He just wants to see a presentation with the results of what I've found. So fortunately we've got that covered. So here we've added the ArcGIS Maps add-in to PowerPoint. We're going to add that same analysis we published up to ArcGIS to a presentation. We'll add a legend as well to make it super clear where the problems are. There we go. And then we'll have it fill an entire slide. And there it is. And the preview here will allow us to adjust our view of the map and position the legend so that we can tell our story as effectively as possible. Now, once we've inserted the map and we're in the slideshow view, we can even actually switch over to a live view of the map so that we can further explore around the map in real time while we're presenting, with many of the same selection and pop-up tools that we were using earlier to explore our data. There it is. And that's ArcGIS Maps for Office. Now, I want to be clear, this wasn't an exhaustive demo, but hopefully it gives you an idea of what the software is for. So let's talk about ArcGIS Maps for Power BI, which is Esri's integration into the world of business intelligence. Now, we just talked about ArcGIS Maps for Office, and in that presentation, we demonstrated how to use the software to solve an inventory problem. We're going to use that same use case here as well, but we're also going to try to answer some of the why questions that go along with it. Now, one of the really nice parts about ArcGIS Maps for Power BI is that we're able to offer it directly in the box with Power BI itself. There's nothing for you to download or install. You don't need to go find it in the marketplace. It's just right there in the tool palette, and it offers many of our core map visualization features to all users of Power BI. Of course, there are a greater variety of features which become available if you're also an Esri customer, but right out of the box you get a great set of tools. So we'll add the visual to the report just as you would with any other visual, and for the purpose of the demo we've prepared the dataset which contains the same information we saw in that Excel sheet, specifically inventory availability across stores for coffee shops. Now we're going to plot the location of our stores on the map using latitude and longitude by dragging our latitude and longitude fields from our dataset into the appropriate field wells. What we're going to do is rebuild the visualization that we created in ArcGIS Maps for Office. So let's get our inventory levels represented here by dragging cup count into the color field well. You'll see that the points are immediately automatically grouped and colored when that happens. We're also going to bring the visual into a full screen view to give ourselves a little bit more room to work. And in this view, we can start investigating the points on the map. Now, as you can see, there's already a small pop-up here which shows what information has been added to the map. Right now, just latitude and longitude. So let's improve that a little bit by adding some details to our tooltips. Specifically, let's go ahead and grab and drag down the cost center, the revenue, street address, and the order date. Now, in our last demo, we identified that 340 Mission Street was a store with a low inventory problem, and it was surrounded by other high inventory stores. We're going to investigate that further with ArcGIS Maps for Power BI. Now, as a side note, we're doing all of this with the free visual right now. This yellow badge on the map is where you can connect your visual to the larger ArcGIS ecosystem or sign in with your Plus account. We can talk about that more at the booth, but essentially Plus gives you access to a few additional features where signing into ArcGIS gives you a ton more, including really the rest of the platform. So let's get into actually editing and styling the map. This is slightly different than other visuals in Power BI, so I'm going to call it out here. In the three-dot menu, you'll click Edit, and that's going to bring you here. So now that we're in edit mode, you've got access to all of our map styling and analysis tools immediately. So let's start setting the map up to behave the way that we want it to. We'll open the base map gallery by clicking the base map button, and here you can see the 4 free base maps that Esri provides to all users of Power BI. If you sign in with a Plus subscription, you'll immediately gain access to a wider variety of base maps, and signing into a full-fledged ArcGIS account will give you access to the broadest variety of base maps, including any custom location base maps that your organization has created, and those can be in any projection you want. For the purpose of our presentation, we're going to stick again with the dark grey canvas base map. Next, let's start styling our points. We're going to click on the symbol style here. We've added the cup count to our color field, so ArcGIS Maps for Power BI has intelligently figured out that we're attempting to classify our data. We're going to adjust the size and shape of our points a little, change the border color and point transparency so that we can see things pop a little bit more on the map. Next, we really need to classify our data correctly so that we can better understand what's happening. So we're going to open our classification types. Right now, the default is natural breaks. Now, if we wanted to, we could adjust those color breaks so that they were broken out by different formulas, but since we've already identified at what point we want to take action on low inventory, we're going to establish manual breaks. We also know that there are 3 sets of groups we want to look at: low inventory, acceptable inventory, and overstocked inventory. So we need to reduce our number of classes down to 3. We're going to adjust our sliders here to set the buckets for those groupings, around 26,000 on the high side and we'll type 2600 on the low side. Just like we did with ArcGIS Maps for Office, we're going to select a representative color ramp to have our darker red colors be our worse or lower inventory points and help them stand out clearly on the map. So 340 Mission Street is definitely still having some problems with its inventory, and right down the street from 340 Mission Street, its neighbor is stocked with almost 10 times the inventory. Now that's just too big of a discrepancy, and this store with greater inventory isn't even generating that much revenue. So this data was captured in March 2019, so another thing we can see from our tooltip is that even though the store only ordered relatively recently, it's already running low on stock, while its neighbor has been able to maintain high levels of stock for longer. So let's investigate why this is happening. We're going to take a step back here and set up our report properly. We're going to start adding in some other Power BI visualizations to our report so that we can get a better idea of what's going on with our data. We'll pull in the cup count and cost center here to this donut chart so that we can start making some relationships between the cost centers and the cup counts. And if we arrange our report here just to make it a little bit more visible, then what we can see as we start clicking around is that our largest cost center isn't even delivering to our troubled Mission Street store. Instead, the Mission Street store is in some different cost center for some reason. Alright, now through the magic of pre-recorded videos, I'm going to speed up our report building here because that's the luxury of this kind of environment. In the process of that, however, we're going to add another chart to the report here, and we're going to look at our order month and average cost of cups to see if that's what happened. Maybe the store just ran out of money. We'll also throw in a scatter chart here to get a feeling for the relationship between the cost per cup and cup count, and we'll distribute this by the cost center as a legend. Alright, so this is starting to give a bit more of a clearer picture of what's going on with our data. If we check our pop-up now, we can see that it says that our last order at 340 Mission Street was in February, so let's take a look at February orders. Maybe something happened. Alright, so what we'll see from our analysis here is that many of these stores are also affected. And if we zoom into 340 Mission Street, we can see that their order was in February and the cost per cup was 11 cents. So let's check the other store next to it. Well, this one was ordered in January. Cost much more, but they're retaining much more of their stock. So something's happened in February here, which caused stock to be either misplaced or maybe orders didn't go through. So let's think about finding similarities between these stores so that we can determine what happened. To do that, we're going to use the Find Similar tool. This is a powerful tool to quickly identify items in your map that have similarities to the rest of your data set. What we're going to do is we're going to bring data into the Find Similar field well to define our category for similarity. And it'll find the top 10 most similar points based on those criteria. In our case, we're going to look for stores with similar revenue, order date, and cup count. To execute that analysis, we'll open the Find Similar tool under the Selection Tools. We'll bring it up, and then once we've brought it up, select our troubled Mission Street store. Now when we execute Find Similar, it's going to very quickly return our 10 most similar locations. And I promise there's no video editing on this, it really is that fast, you should try it yourself. We've discovered that our first most similar store based on the categories we defined is over here on Fillmore Street. Now that makes sense if we look at the pop-up because it's a low revenue store with a low cup count. But these folks made their last order in January, so again it makes much more sense that they'd be low on inventory. So let's take a look and see if we can resolve this inventory problem. We're going to try and find a store that we can send a manager out to go pick up some stock and bring it back quickly. We don't want him to make more than a 5-minute round trip, so we'll set up a 2-minute drive time. It'll just take a moment to set that up. And we can quickly have our manager go down the street to grab some inventory from either of these stores that are really close by. And that's the basics of ArcGIS Maps for Power BI. Okay, so let's dig into ArcGIS Maps for SharePoint. This is our integration into the world of SharePoint to enable you to manage your document libraries with some spatial intelligence. In the case of our previous demos related to ArcGIS Maps for Office and ArcGIS Maps for Power BI, we identified some inventory management problems. We solved the real-time components of that problem on the fly with ArcGIS Maps for Power BI, but it would be really good to get to the root of it in our inventory document library. In this case, we have an underperforming coffee shop, and we're faced with the problem of how to pull the inventory manifest from that shop at 340 Mission Street from the list of inventory data we have in this SharePoint document library. The problem is that we don't really know which document goes with which coffee shop. So how do we figure that out? Well, what we need to do is geo-enable this list by using the ArcGIS Maps locate workflow. This will quickly allow us to marry up the documents with their locations. Now I'm going to zip through the configuration of this workflow since we're really focused on the benefit that you get from the product and the presentation more than trying to teach you how to configure it. But what I do want to point out is that by default we'll use the world geocoder to convert addresses into latitudes and longitudes. You could use your own if you wished, but this one's going to be simple for our use case. ArcGIS Maps for SharePoint will automatically find the right columns which contain relevant information to process that list. And we're going to go ahead and get this processed and go back to the list once it's all done. Now, since the location is completed for the whole list, it's ready to go. Now that the list is ready to go, we need a map to start putting documents on. So we're going to edit our site, and we're going to add in the ArcGIS Maps search web part to our SharePoint page. Once we've added it in, we're going to edit the web page so that we can configure it. All right, so here is our ArcGIS Maps search web part. What we're going to do is add the SharePoint list to it. Since we've already geo-enabled this list, it'll automatically pop up on the list of available layers, and it'll show up on the map in the correct location. Now we're going to style the map a little just to make it a bit clearer. And again, through the magic of pre-recorded video, I'm going to fast forward through this. It's a lot of fun to, explore and find better ways to style your map, but for our purposes, we really just want something that's super clear and easy to read. Alright, so we've got the map into a state where we can see the street addresses for our coffee shops really clearly. We can double check that this is the right coffee shop by just looking at the pop-up here, and it shows the correct low cup count value of 1200, so this is definitely the place to take action. Now that we've got a better visual of the data, we're going to marry the inventory manifest with the coffee shop list data that we can see on the screen. The first thing that we're going to do is create a relationship between the two. So we're going to need to set a geotagging attribute for our document, which will be one or more of the columns that we have in our list. In this case, we're going to use address, and it'll give us a preview of the available addresses. So once we've established the attribute we're going to use, we'll move over to the geotag panel here. And we'll select the inventory drop-down which contains our manifests. So now we can select documents from our list like this, and then we can just click and drag those manifests over the points that represent the coffee shops. The software automatically tags the documents with the addresses and adds those tags to the file's properties in SharePoint. If we hover over the tag count, we can also see which tags have been applied to those documents in the past and find stuff that way too. Now we've got one last job to do while we're in this view, which is to tag our inventory manifest to 340 Mission Street. Alright, so now that we're done tagging, we can move over to the GeoSearch panel, and here we can discover any documents that have been tagged to specific locations just by clicking the location. We can even open them directly in Excel online so that we can look directly at the inventory manifest for the location, like this. Alright, so we've spatially enabled this document library, and that gives us a better understanding of what's being referenced and where it is. So now let's say that we want to get a little bit more value out of this data, and we've been asked to figure out consumer coffee buying patterns and how they're affecting the success or failure of our store locations. This is another problem we can solve in ArcGIS Maps for SharePoint by enriching our coffee shop list with demographics around customer buying patterns. So let's modify the workflow that we added to the list. Again, I'm going to fast forward past most of this, but after we're done moving through the locate workflow, we will opt to enrich the data, and that is right here. So when you enrich your data, you're going to be presented with a wide variety of demographic options that we'll show here, and those are things like consumer behaviors, consumer spending patterns. There's all kinds of stuff, and we'll drill through that a little bit here just to demonstrate all the different variables that are available. For our use specifically, we're going to search for things related to coffee shop behaviors and then list what's available. Now, in particular, since we're managing a coffee shop, we could look at the shopping market potential, we could look at, psychographics and advertising, but really what we're interested in here is buying patterns for brewed coffee over the last 30 days for consumers, and that's right here. So we'll add that in and set it to examine this data within a 5-minute drive time around our locations. All right, and off it goes. All right, so when we come back to our list this time, which we'll see in a second here, not only do we see our location field in place, but we've also got an index now of how many people bought brewed coffee at a convenience store in the past 30 days. So let's bring all of this list data over to the ArcGIS Maps web part to pull it all together. We're going to add the list that we were just working with to the map, and once again, we'll just zip through the styling to get to something that works really well. Here we go. Now, the big picture is to ask how these stores are placed, if they're well placed, and what analysis we can actually apply to verify if they are well placed. So we have all the data in a list, and now we just need to analyze it. We're going to use the Find Hotspots tool against this data. So what we'll do is we'll use the store index for consumer purchases for the past 30 days, and then we'll run the analysis to see how things look. Once this returns, what we're going to see is a very visual representation of the hot and cold spots for this consumer coffee purchasing index. It tells us that there are some stores, particularly the blue ones in the northwest edge of the map, that are just in a low demand area, and that might be why their relative sales are lower. Comparatively, the area in the northeast is really hot, so it makes sense that there are many stores there. So this, you can see, it's just a very quick way to analyze your data, and it's one of the analysis tools that is part of the ArcGIS platform. So let's look quickly now at sharing our data out with our stakeholders. Just like with ArcGIS Maps for Office, we can share our data out to the ArcGIS platform. So we'll share the map out to the ArcGIS platform by giving it a name and then publishing it. And once it's published up to ArcGIS, we can click through to our ArcGIS Online site and view the analysis we just completed in a web page. We can see everything that we gathered in ArcGIS Maps for SharePoint, and we have complete control over the data. And you'll see that in just a second here. There it is. Now, to wrap all of this up, one of the nice things that we can do, having shared this up to ArcGIS Online, is that we can also reconsume this and share it back through ArcGIS Maps for Office, and bring that data and that layer back in through a PowerPoint slide. So if we bring it in from ArcGIS, and we'll add the map to this PowerPoint slide, we can rapidly create a slide to communicate the same information back out to a stakeholder who might not have access to either the SharePoint site or to ArcGIS Online. And of course, this all comes with the same capabilities that you would get if you had started your analysis in ArcGIS Maps for Office, and then you can customize the layout of your slide and your legend however you desire. And that is ArcGIS Maps for SharePoint.